Welcome, everybody, to what is the first of three Sankofa collaborative programs dedicated to the Great Migration. Today's program, of course, and our program on April 23rd will be virtual. And in October, we will once again be in person at Grounds for Sculpture to have our third program on the Great Migration. I really would like to thank so many of you for following us via our weekly newsletter and attending our virtual and our in-person workshops. So we've started a little late today because one of our presenters, we believe, is having some technical difficulty and is not quite with us yet. So I'm going to give just a very short introduction to define the Great Migration as I see it, and I have experienced it, very short. And then we will go to the film, The Price of Silence, and I will tell you a bit about that before the film starts if Ridgeley is not with us. Hopefully that is okay for everyone. In 1965, Macmillan Publishers took a great giant step and published with reservation Claude Brown's classic Man-Child in the Promised Land. In the foreword to that book, Brown wrote, quote, "I want to talk about the experience of a misplaced generation, of a misplaced people, and an extremely complex, confused society. This is a story of their searching, their dreams, their sorrows, their small and futile rebellions, and their endless battle to establish their own place in America's greatest metropolis, New York, and in America itself." Brown goes on to say, again, I quote, "The children of these disillusioned colored pioneers inherited the total lot of their parents, the disappointments, the anger. To add to their misery, they had little hope of deliverance. For where does one run to when he is already in the promised land?" When I was 16 years old, I read Claude Brown's seminal autobiography. It was my introduction to reading about the lives of those living in a gritty urban neighborhood. I saw in that book what my own neighborhood was becoming through Brown's words. Indeed, less than 5 years later, the challenges faced by those in Brown's Harlem became those of my community in Elizabeth, New Jersey. My parents, in anticipation of the birth of their first child, me, bought a house in a white neighborhood in 1951. During my childhood, there were three, or perhaps during my early childhood, there were three, perhaps four African-American families living on a block of perhaps 100 one-family and two-family homes. It was a working class neighborhood of largely Irish, German, Slavic, and Italian immigrants. By the time I reached 10 years of age, the neighborhood dynamics started to change, and within a 5-year period, it became almost exclusively African American with a few Latino families. By purchasing 100-year-old homes, first and second generation African Americans migrants took one step closer to fulfilling their goal, achieving a piece of the American dream of home ownership. My parents were Southern migrants. Their stories read like that of so many other migrants. With their families, they moved to New Jersey as children from their homes in Georgia and South Carolina. Their fathers, in search of better opportunity, landed jobs at the Singer Sewing Machine Factory in Elizabeth, New Jersey. Hardworking and ambitious, they made a more comfortable living, and they were able to provide for their families better than their fathers had done for them. Their children were able to attend school and escape the kind of hard work in the fields that their ancestors had to endure. Life was better, but living in New Jersey also had its challenges. Different challenges than those faced in the farmlands of Georgia and South Carolina, but in some ways no less daunting. The problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line, noted W.E.B. Du Bois in his seminal work, The Souls of Black Folk, published in 1903. Du Bois, the first African American to receive a doctorate from Harvard University, predicted what was thought to be a Southern dilemma, the Negro problem. He would become a major concern. He thought the problem would become a major concern of the entire country, and his prediction was correct. The dawn of the 20th century witnessed the migration of millions of African Americans from the rural farms of the South to the rich industrial centers of the northern urban cities. Conditions in the South, steeped in an inhumane Jim Crow culture, forced millions of African Americans to leave Southern farms and migrate north in search of Zion, or the Promised Land. The Negro problem of Southerners became the Negro problem of the North. Places like Harlem, Newark, Elizabeth, Trenton, Camden received thousands of these immigrants who were looking for their Zion. And it did not take long for them to discover that racism was not limited to geographical boundaries. The massive migration was perhaps the most significant internal historical event of the 20th century American history. Northern urban industrial centers were a magnet for these African Americans looking for employment and better living conditions. New Jersey, and in particular New Jersey's industrial urban centers, played a key role in the African American migration for several reasons. New Jersey's larger cities were of manageable size. The African American communities within were close knit, and the oral history of New Jersey's participation in the Atlantic Coastline Underground Railroad was pervasive in Southern African American communities, leading to a belief that less hostility would be waiting for them in New Jersey. The problems that plagued Claude Brown's Harlem, the changes that took place in my Elizabeth neighborhood, and the challenges the African Americans faced in Newark and Camden and other places were the same. Poor housing conditions, an eroding industrial-based economy, the decline of health, recreation, and educational services, eventful introduction of a drug culture, and dogged determination of racism continued to dominate the larger urban northern culture was the norm. Manchild and the Promised Land's treatment of such subjects served as one of the watershed moments of my life. It marked my growing up. No longer was my reading limited to European or Anglo classics. No longer did my world revolve around the popular teenage romance novels and movies of the day. A little naive, but eager to explore life vicariously, I took Manchild and the Promised Land as my Bible, reshaping my outlook on what it means to be Black in America during that 16th year of life. I must have read Manchild at least 3 times that year. The family dynamic, the impact of a drug and alcohol addiction on a community, the hardship of finding and keeping employment, the reality of unrelenting poverty, descriptions of Harlem street life, and the explicit nature of young sexuality described in the book enthralled and shocked me. Brown's book apparently turned on the light for many others, in addition to this one naive teenage girl from Elizabeth. As Brown's New York Times obituary reported in 2002, quote, Manchild and the Promised Land quickly became a bestseller, opening up a new world to mainstream audiences with its raw narrative of a boyhood spent among killers, drug addicts, and prostitutes. Though not published as a memoir, it closely paralleled Mr. Brown's life in virtually every detail. What many of us talk about in abstractions, wrote the critic Irving Howe, is here given the quivering reality of a boy's life, his struggle, his efforts of understanding. This book contributes to our sense of what America is today. And although that was written 60 years ago, it still rings true. It was published at the height of the civil rights movement, and the book reached far beyond the traditional literary world, drawing new attention to the lives of urban Blacks. It was sold more than 4 million copies and been translated into 14 languages. Today, it sells more than 30,000 copies a year and is required reading in many high schools and colleges. So that's my introduction to what you're going to see and a little of what you are going to hear and we are going to discuss hopefully concluding at 3:30 as we had planned. Many of you know The Price of Silence, which was produced and partially directed by Ridgeley Hutchinson, a New Jerseyan. It was surprisingly well received and well done, considering it was Ridgeley's first attempt at independent film. I think it was his first attempt at any film. And the reaction to it was so positive to parts 1 and 2 that he went on to make part 3. And part 3 is about the Great Migration in New Jersey through the lens of just a few people. But the main lens that we will hear about is through Dr. Kenny, who traveled from the South to the North in the 1920s to start a hospital. Jim Crow ran rampant in New Jersey during that time. As a matter of fact, the New Jersey division of the Ku Klux Klan was located just about 3 blocks away from where Dr. Kenny established his office, his hospital, and his home, right about 3 or 4 doors in from the corner of the major intersection of downtown Newark, Broad and Market Street. So that tells you how well the Klan was accepted in New Jersey and how their powers just sort of spread through the state. We had our problems here too. So we will start with the film and start with learning about the Kenny family's life through his grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And after that, we will move on to another few stories told by me, and then a discussion at the end.
In the first decade of the formal period of the Great Migration, there's enormous kind of outrage and response from not just landowners, but political leadership trying to find ways to prevent Black migration. And so this is also a fraught and dangerous activity that, if caught, could be jailed, could be punished, could be fined.
Booker T. Washington had become president of Tuskegee Institute. And he called the school to say, we need a doctor here for our students. Can you send someone? They sent Grandpa Kenny. So he arrived in Tuskegee and was horrified at what he found here. There was no running water. There was no sewer system. Everything was as unhealthy as it could be. So he collaborated with George Washington Carver, the two of them, to try to address some of these health issues. And so they came up with systems that would improve sanitation. Grandpa Kenny would work for about 20 hours a day because he was also going out as far as 100 miles in a horse and buggy to treat people in the rural areas. Now, during this time, right after World War I, there were about 3,000 Black veterans who came back and had nowhere to go for ongoing treatment. Grandpa Kenny got right on a train, went to Brookline, Massachusetts, to the donor's home, Elizabeth Mason, and he pleaded his case, and she gave him another $25,000. So he had enough to build a real hospital and named it after her grandfather, John Andrew. Isn't that amazing? It was the John Andrew Hospital, and here's Grandpa Kenny, John Andrew Kenny. Just amazing. So the hospital was open, it was functioning, but the Ku Klux Klan here in Tuskegee said there is no way. These Black people don't know enough. They don't know what they're doing. We are not going to have a hospital here run by Black people. We're not going to do that. And Grandpa Kenny was seen as the single barrier, because when they would have meetings with the university or Tuskegee Institute officials, he would be the one that was not in any way, shape, or form prepared to compromise. So they said, he's a problem. He's got to go. When he got that call about the Klan, everybody in the family was asleep. He woke Frida up. We gotta go. She got the children up. They threw some things in the bag. They got in the car. They had a dog in the front seat and a rifle on the front seat. Kids in the back. In the middle of the night, creeping along with no lights on the car to the train station. He put Frida and the children, all 4 children, on the train.
After the Klan ran Granddaddy and the family out of Tuskegee, Alabama, he moved them to Newark, New Jersey area so that he could establish a hospital for Blacks. And whereas there were no hospitals treating Blacks at the time other than a few white hospitals, which were, shoving them to the back of the room.
Newark would be the place because the community need was overwhelming. So many people had moved to Newark from the South, but they were confined to the 3rd Ward because that's where they let Black people live. So it was so overcrowded, it had become a slum. And so Grandpa Kenny said, this is where we need to build that hospital.
One of the amazing things about my grandfather was his dedication to patients as a physician, regardless of economic status. So he encouraged anyone, any patient that needed care, any Black patient that needed care, to come to the hospital. And there were sliding scales economically of, whether they were able to pay or not, or how much they were able to pay. And therefore, the Black community poured into the hospital that he created because they were welcomed, and they were not welcomed at white hospitals. My grandfather was the personal physician to Booker T. Washington and also to George Washington Carver. And what that meant for my father and his brothers and sisters is that they had exposure to these great Black pioneers and the level at which they excelled. I am so proud of my father, John Kenny Jr., who was the leading dermatologist in the country. Because of his accomplishments, he established a dermatology department at Howard University. He became the most noted dermatologist in skincare for Blacks.
My dad was incredible as well. He went to Bates College in Maine. Then he went to Meharry Medical School. He did internships and residencies in internal medicine. And had an abiding interest in sickle cell disease. Now, interestingly enough, he was medical director of John Andrew Hospital. Then he was medical director of the VA hospital, the same one that got his dad right out of town.
The Great Migration began during the 1890s when there started to be a slow trickle. Jim Crow was at its worst during that period. And they knew that life was not going to get any better where they were, that they had to take, they had to be in control of their own future. And that future was looking pretty bleak if they stayed in the South. They looked to the North, hoping to find better job opportunities, hoping to find better housing. But again, most important of all, they looked to the North as the hope for their children, that their children would be able to receive an education, would have freedom to walk the streets, and would have access to better schools. And they knew that there was no hope for them where they were. They knew staying in the same place was not going to get any better for them. And there was the possibility, if they migrated north, that their life could change for the better.
People were driven out of the South by the transformation of black codes and the actual attacks of the Ku Klux Klan between 1865 and 1873. They were moving because terrorism and the suppression of their right to vote, the loss of the opportunities of Reconstruction were moving people out of the South. Jim Crow evolves in really important ways between 1875 and 1896. And that piece where it goes from being essentially local versions of racial suppression into an organized and systematic national system of racial suppression, that's one of the most important transformations in the United States. So redlining as a policy evolves pretty dramatically across the first half of the 20th century. There is a private group of lenders called the Homeowners Loan Corporation that prior to 1925 had maps that they produced for local banks to decide where they could maximize the profit in terms of giving out homeowners loans. So green-lined areas aggressively grew. Red-lined areas stagnated and fell apart and were targeted to be destroyed. Those processes assume that all those neighborhoods remain the same generation by generation, and it's absolutely not true. You can look at a place like Newark and see the ways that ethnic and different kinds of racial neighborhoods shift. This happens all across the country, and it continues and is amplified ironically here in New Jersey by Woodrow Wilson, both as governor and then as he runs for president, where people call Abraham Lincoln the great liberator, which is also a kind of troublesome phrase. Woodrow Wilson was really the great segregator. He reintroduced different levels of racial segregation with the force of federal law and policy that then defined the next 50 years of US history. And as they needed African-American workers to populate the hotels and the restaurants, they were very explicit about blacks living on the west side of town and then setting aside a segregated area for those residences and expecting a certain kind of behavior. I think the most horrifying story in that particular town was there was a segregated beach. Beach number 4 was the only beach African-Americans were allowed to use. And they actually had an open sewage line dumping out into the water where they were supposed to go in. And so these kinds of daily humiliations, often by the minute or by the hour, were the standard. And so, yeah, the New Jersey was not a warm and welcoming paradise. Most African Americans, as they tried to move out of the South, were taking trains. And so there were some of the best jobs were Pullman porters, people working to kind of support and keep organized the experience on a segregated train system. And so the porters actually would circulate black newspapers across the South, quietly under the notice of their employers. And this would give people hints about where there are jobs, where there are new opportunities, where they could actually have more freedom than what they had where they lived. So if you're very lucky, it's a domestic service job. But overall, they tended to be migrant labor, agricultural jobs. You know, New Jersey is still a garden state in this period. And so to be able to be in the cranberry bogs, the blueberry bogs, to pick potatoes, string beans, Jersey tomatoes.
Well, there was a process. Again, usually one member of the family, usually a male member of the family, came first, established himself in some sort of position, usually went to a friend or someone else, worked, saved his money, and then would send back for either one other person from the family, so there would be two of them up here, or maybe made enough money and was sensible enough with his or her money to ask for the rest of the family come. When it finally came crashing in on them that we're losing our workforce here, because a good number of Black people were tenant farmers. And my land is not being worked properly because I'm losing this workforce. There were aggressive attempts to stem the tide of migration. So a father might come, send money back down for a railroad ticket for his family. Well, the mail would be tampered with, and the owner of the land that you were farming on would come and say, if y'all know what's good for you, you'll tell Jack to come back home where he belongs, and tell him if he doesn't, he may not have a family to come back to. Well, my family, I guess they were pretty typical, both my mother's family and my father's family. My father's family came up probably around 1915 to Elizabeth, and my mother's family came in 1921 to Newark. My father, who lost his mother, I think he was probably about 10 years old when his mother died, and he and his younger twin brothers were taken from Elizabeth to what was supposed to be an orphanage in Florida. It turned out to be one of those work camps. This would have been probably about 1924 or so. After a year there, he could not take the conditions, and somehow he escaped. He made his way on foot back to New Jersey. It took him almost a year to do it, but he did it. Worked for, somehow amassed some money, went back south and rescued his brothers and brought them back up to New Jersey. I don't know how he came back up with his brothers, but I do remember him telling about walking from Florida back to New Jersey, the hobo route, hopping on trains, that kind of thing. The journey was very dangerous because you never knew. There were scouts along the way who were looking for people who were purposely leaving the South to come north, who would send you right back to where you came from, or arrest you on some sort of trumped up charge, or arrest you for trespassing because you were found sleeping in their barn or elsewhere. In New Jersey, the migrants flocked to the larger cities like Newark and Elizabeth and Trenton and Patterson. Overall, in the state, the Black population increased by 132% within a very short period of time. There is no way that those cities were prepared to handle that large influx of people in such a short period of time. The housing was substandard. There were no utilities that were available to accommodate that many people in some of our neighborhoods. And because of the large numbers and because of Northern prejudice against people of color, they were limited to only certain areas of cities. Indoor plumbing was a very poor quality, if it existed at all. Outhouses in our large cities were very common things to see even during the early days of the 20th century. The schools were not fully equipped to handle the children in many ways.
So, of course, this discrepancies between African Americans and other Americans in terms of their health care, these reflected the rest of the kind of Jim Crow structures that existed. In the particular case of hospitals, it was nearly impossible for anyone who managed to get a medical license as an African American to gain privileges within a white hospital.
Well, probably one of the biggest discrepancies is that one who was Black could not be admitted into a hospital by a Black doctor. A Black doctor would have to turn his patient over. They had partnerships with white doctors, and that white doctor would have to be responsible for what was your patient while they're in the hospital.
The National Medical Association was established in 1895, and really it was established because physicians realized, I learned through my own research, that there were locally throughout the nation, throughout the United States, there were local, county, and state medical societies. And physicians of color, Black physicians, were not able to join those local county medical societies. And if you couldn't join the local county medical societies, that meant you could not also join the AMA, the American Medical Association. Dr. Kenny was involved very early on with the NMA. He was a secretary for 8 years of the National Medical Association, and he was also an editor of the journal. So, Governor Murphy established the New Jersey Maternal and Infant Health Innovation Authority, and that authority was really established to reduce maternal morbidity and mortality, and to also reduce racial disparities for birthing people. That's extremely important. In the United States, our maternal morbidity and mortality is too high compared to other industrialized nations. And the disparities that we see among Black birthing people are 3 to 4 times higher than their white counterparts. In New Jersey, those disparities are along the lines of 7 to 9 times higher than their white counterparts. And unfortunately, those disparities have been persistent over a number of decades. So I think that, when we really want to unravel this problem, we have to understand that it didn't occur. It occurred over a long period of time. And so then we really have to really unroof it at its very core and its very beginning. And I say that also, oftentimes when we think about some of the disparities that exist, people think about the social determinants of health. They think about access to care. They think about transportation. They think about childcare issues. But one of the things that we know, and there's much evidence in the scientific literature to demonstrate this, is that even Black women of high socioeconomic status still have still experience some of the same maternal disparities in morbidity and mortality. So if we've now taken away the issues of access to care, because these women with high socioeconomic status, they have insurance, they have access to care, then why they don't have transportation problems, they don't have inaccessibility to healthy foods, why then are we still seeing these disparities in morbidity and mortality for these birthing people? And so this is where we know that racism in the healthcare system has to be addressed. Much like maternal morbidity and mortality, there are disparities in infant mortality in New Jersey. In the United States, the mortality rate is about 5.2 per 1,000 births. but the disparity that exists between Black non-Hispanic infants is about 10.9 per 1,000 births, compared to about 4.4 for non-Hispanic whites. So it's about almost double the rate for non-Hispanic Blacks. In New Jersey, the disparities are for non-Hispanic Blacks, the infant mortality rate is about 4 times higher. So there still are disparities that we want to address for infant mortality as well as for maternal morbidity and mortality. I always want to remain optimistic and hopeful, but we have a lot of work to do. When we have a diverse workforce, we have better health outcomes.
The mission for us is really serving historic communities, right? Communities that have, over time, had to be resilient in the face of so much turmoil. And we just use arts as a motivator for that, kind of like taking a social justice lens of like equity and justice, but putting it through the artwork, putting it through theater and putting it through visual arts and public art. And then there's another piece to that, which is making sure that the youth who work and live in this city or who grow in this city, come of age in the city, really have an understanding on what it's like to take control and own what's around you. So my entire lineage came from the South. My mother's family has a really rich history in Oxford, North Carolina. And both her parents, her father, Odell Rowland, and her mother, Madeline Hines Rowland, their families, their parents, both migrated here from North Carolina. And when you look at Souvenir de la Voix, right, it's about remembering the voices, right, which is really about oral traditions. I'm really big into oral traditions, right? We don't really have history without those things being passed down from generation to generation. And my mural partner, Hans Lundy, is of Haitian descent. So oral histories is almost all he has. So a lot of our collaborative murals have Haitian Creole names, titles. And that's just us sharing culture. I'm giving a lot of game on like American history and migration and revolution and all that stuff. And then he's giving me a lot of game on just Haitian history. And we're kind of uncovering things together. But that mural is about that. It's about having those oral histories and memories of ancestors that kind of set forth the path of what your life could be. And then we made all of the young people on the painting in color because they're in full focus, right? And then it's transitionary things that people do in their own lives that transition Black or white or ethnicity or culture, right? Everybody does hair, everybody braids hair, everybody has music and drums. Everybody likes cool clothes, whatever you deem to be a cool clothing, right? And everybody is under one sky. So there's that cloud scene that leads off to the distance, which is dreaming and inspiration. There's the mother and child with the braided hair. And then there's the two elders, the grandmother and grandfather in the background. One is smoking a pipe and one playing the drums, right? One looking off to the distance and one looking at the crowd. And then there's the young lady with the headphones on. So, it's an ode to the past, but looking towards the future.
That was part 3 of The Price of Silence, centering on the Great Migration. There was one line at the very end of the film that struck me. And I've seen this a number of times, but I don't remember hearing the line before as distinctly or as strongly as I heard it this time. And he said, "We are all under one sky." I don't know if anyone else picked up on that. But it did for me. Maybe it's because of the political climate that we're in. Maybe it's because my arthritis is bothering me today. I don't know what. But we are all under one sky, which is indeed fact, but something that we have not only in this country, but all over the world found difficult to accept. So I don't know if anyone has a burning comment or question that they'd like to make before we launch into a larger conversation at the end of some of my remarks. If you do, now is the time to speak up.
Hi, Linda, it's Rosalind, and I joined the meeting sort of late. And I was just wondering, I didn't see the beginning of that documentary that you just played, but I mean, I saw the beginning, but I came in right at the beginning. So I didn't hear who made it and what was the purpose of it originally.
Okay. It was made by Ridgeley Hutchinson, who we expected to join us today. I saw him trying to log in earlier on, and he must be having some technical difficulty. But Beverly or Elaine, are you here? You might want to give Ridgeley's history because I think you know it a little bit better than I do. It was your work that inspired him to, for the first time as a near senior citizen, go into documentary filmmaking.
Hi, yes. It's really interesting how that all came about because Elaine and I have known Ridgeley for a number of years. And as a matter of fact, his father was a teacher in the Hopewell Valley school system back when I was going to school. And so one night, Ridgeley came to hear one of our talks in Rocky Hill. And he was so struck by what we were saying about in our PowerPoint, because he said, why was this never taught in our school system, talking about slavery in New Jersey? So from that encounter, he said that he wanted to talk further about what can we do about this? How can we get this information out to more people? So that's when he came up with to do a documentary about it. And it was just a little seedling in his head, and it just mushroomed from there. And he was particularly intrigued by the story of my fourth great grandfather, who was brought here by a pastor during the Revolutionary War. So that's pretty much how it started with Ridgeley and in the documentary, and on to making part 3.
Thank you, Beverly. What you might want to know, Rosalind, is that Beverly and her partner, Elaine, have started an African-American museum in New Jersey in the Sourland Mountains in the western part of the state near the Delaware. And it might be worthy of a visit one of these days. But I thought I had the story correct, Beverly, and I could have, but thank you for telling it so much better than I ever would have told it.
No, Linda.
Any other comments that you feel you would like to make now from anyone?
Yes.
Yes.
Hi, Linda, it's Joan.
Hi, Joan.
I loved the end, the mural, and where I couldn't see on this because my screen is tiny. Where is that mural?
Actually, I know exactly where it is. I recognize it from the scene. It's on near the corner of Orange Street and Broad Street in Newark. Okay. And it's right near the Newark Public Library. It's on the back side of the Newark Public Library and the Rutgers Law School. You can see it from there. Joan, hopefully you plan to attend our events honoring Cujo Benquante, and I believe that mural is part of the bus tour that we're having there. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, we'll talk offline at another point. Or
Yeah.
actually, I'll do a commercial at the end of this session here as well.
Good, good. All right, thanks.
Any
Good.
other questions?
Linda, Linda
have-
Oppenheim has a
Oh,
question.
how are you, Linda Oppenheimer? How are you? I haven't seen you in a while.
She
I know.
says,
I'm fine. Thank
Go
you
ahead.
for this session. I'm picking up my granddaughter and on my phone. So,
Okay.
my question is there a current reverse migration to the South by African Americans? I hear people talk about wanting to leave New Jersey and go back to actually family property, perhaps, or at least the location where their ancestors grew up.
Yes, I actually have a son who calls himself doing that. He moved to Richmond, Virginia, to be near our ancestral property on my husband's side, in a little town called Supply, Virginia, near the Rappahannock River, and an area where many a Civil War battle was fought. Now, he never lived there, and his father never lived there, but we would go back for family reunions throughout his lifetime, and for some reason, he thinks he's going to be a farmer. More power to him. I support him, but there does seem to be, and I am afraid to answer your question because I don't quite understand it myself. My trips to the South, although it may be beautiful and it's warmer and there is lots of culture there, I'm always just a little nervous, and something always happens to me. I always experience something that makes me a little bit nervous about being down there. So if there's someone with us who feels that they can explain that reverse migration trend, please give it a try. Anyone?
I would say property taxes.
Okay,
that's
one
what
at a time. Identify yourself, please. And
my name is Kim, and what I would say is property taxes. When I hear people say they're leaving New Jersey, it has to do with cost of living.
Okay. And I heard another voice come in as well.
Yes, Beverly Keys Kelly, and I apologize for jumping on so late, but I just would like to know if there's another way I could view the documentary after the fact.
Sam, can I ask you to answer that question?
Yes, I just put in the chat a few minutes ago the link to the 3 documentaries, which are on Ridgeley's website. It's www.Truehart, Truehart Productions, all one word, trueheartproductions.org. And all three of the parts of The Price of Silence are available on that website.
Okay, thank you.
Another comment or question?
Well, I had a comment.
Identify yourself, please, again.
My name is Rosalind Zinga-Nico.
I'm sorry, Rosalind. I don't have video, so I'm not seeing you. That's why I'm asking people to identify themselves. Go ahead.
So Newark was sort of my adopted city since I married a person who grew up in Newark. But talking about people relocating, I mean, I'm not going back south, but I am relocating back to my home state of Indiana, just because of what you said about it's all about the cost of living and taxes. And I have several friends. I lived in North Carolina for a little while a few years ago, and I had the church that I co-pastored with my husband, I would say at least 10 to 15 members relocated back south. And then during the last couple of the years when I was in North Carolina, there were more people coming. And I think it does all boil down to a lot of housing. And I always say that there's not a lack of housing in this country, it's a lack of affordable housing. So I think that's people have land in the South, just like I have a house in Indiana. Why would you continue to struggle in a place when you can have a little bit better form of living?
And the overall cost of living, not just the housing, but I think the overall living is a concern. Okay. Any other comments? And Linda Oppenheimer, did we answer your question, at least in part?
Yes, I'd be interested if somebody is actually going to be researching that to get the full picture, but that's certainly understandable to look for more affordable living. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? If not, I'm going to move on. You notice that we're talking Great Migration, New Jersey stories. So you basically heard maybe 2 or 3 in Ridgeley's film. You heard about my father. You'll hear a little bit more about that. But I'm really going to concentrate on the family of a good friend of mine, and that is Philip Easton. And I think that his family's migration story is really a quintessential migration story. Although they haven't done the reverse thing, they're now part of that last leg, but you might want to hear from them. So Charlie, if we can go to the other PowerPoint, you see the name up there. This is an image of my great-grandmother, Mary Palmore, and my mother, Mary Palmore Caldwell. And they both migrated to Newark, New Jersey in 1921. My mother was 3 years old, and my great-grandmother, born in southwestern Alabama in 1870, was 50. And these photos are circa 1950, right before I was born. I just always liked, they heard me say from Elizabeth. The entire family moved to Elizabeth around 1925. And that's where they both lived for the rest of their lives. I like to include them in presentations about the Great Migration. And in presentations, I managed to put them in some way, shape, or form. It was the depressed economic conditions and tense implementation of Jim Crow in their home in Southwest Georgia that propelled them to Newark. And I have learned, since I've been older and reading as a senior citizen, that the particular town that they came from was known for its brutality and its record number of people that they lynched. So the entire family came up at one time. They never went back to visit, and we never received visitors from there. And I did not learn where my mother was born, until after, probably almost 10 years after her death. It was never talked about. Believe me, I was always an inquisitive child. I asked, and she said, "I'm from Georgia, and that's all you need to know." It was an older cousin who said she was eavesdropping once, and she overheard the town that they came from, and that's how she knew. So that's a migration story that hopefully I'll live long enough to research and be able to tell audiences exactly what did happen, but I haven't done it yet. But I'm really going to focus, I mentioned then because I'm grateful. My mother especially worked tirelessly, who prayed unceasingly, and hoped so fervently, and loved so passionately her family and her children and this country. And for it was their prayers, their strength, their passion, and their love that brought me here this afternoon. And probably all of you have someone like that in your past as well. And I believe in paying homage to our ancestors. So it took people from all stations in life to build this country, and to build the city of Plainfield, where my subject today, Philip Easton, lives very quietly and nicely and successfully with his own family. So next slide, Charlie. That's me with my mother. Next slide. Forgot I was supposed to show that one. Next slide. Okay. This is Mrs. Rose Parrish, who migrated to Newark, New Jersey, and had one daughter. She's pictured in next slide. Oh, that's her husband. I'm sorry, I'm out of order, but that's her husband. Next slide. And that's her daughter. Oh, sorry, back. Okay. That's her daughter, her only child, Oweda Easton, and her husband, Celia Easton, at their granddaughter's wedding, I believe, many, many years ago. They're both deceased at this point. And the other picture that you had up there that I said go back. Okay. This is the greater Eastern family. There's Philip on the right. his wife, the third person in from the right, his grandson, who we are all proud of. He's also my godson. Next to his grandmother and his mother and his father and his aunt and his cousin. They're a happy group of people. Thank you for allowing me to use you as an example today. But even more than that, thank you for becoming part of my family and taking care of me and others in my family for so many years. Okay, next slide. Those are his daughters again, of whom we're all very proud of. Okay. This is not a member of the parish family, but most of what I'm going to talk about today is, not about the wealthy or the famous or the people who received college educations or Ivy League educations, but about a woman, Rose Parrish, and I'll mention a few other women in the talk who were in domestic service and who provided a very much needed and service not only to those people that they worked for, but to their families as well. Because for the first time in their lives, they had the opportunity to make a decent living and to make a decent salary. I had a cousin who was running away from a harsh husband. She was doing housework down in Whitesville, North Carolina. She was being paid $2 to $4 a week, working in various houses during the week. She left. She migrated to Elizabeth, New Jersey. She did housework for that first year, where her salary jumped up to about $10 to $12 a week. But a year after that, she received a civil service job in the post office and was making $25 a week, while her sister down in North Carolina was still making that $2 to $4 every week. So one of the main reasons that people migrated was the opportunity for financial advancement or economic advancement, making a salary where they could raise their children, provide a little bit of what they had dreamed of receiving for themselves, for their children. And they knew that this was not going to happen in the South at any time soon. So although we could have talked about Queen Latifah and Whitney or Cissy Houston and other famous people who came from New Jersey, I thought that I would dwell on ordinary women who had their craft, their opportunity of getting a piece of the American dream by traveling north. Next slide. Okay. And all they wanted, James Brown wrote a song during the middle of the 1960s, during the Civil Rights Movement and the Black Power movement, that said, I don't want nobody to give me nothing. Just open up the door and I'll get it myself. Don't give me degeneration, give me true communication. Don't give me sorrow. I want equal opportunity to live tomorrow. Some of us try as hard as we can. We don't want no sympathy. We just want to be a woman. I don't want nobody to give me nothing. Just open up the door. Boom, boom. I'll get it myself. So when I saw this picture, I thought of that tune immediately. This is a church. I don't know where it is or who it is, but I thought that it was apropos for this talk this afternoon. Next slide. His lyrics succinctly represented the feelings of many African-American men and women who, from the conclusion of the Civil War, as was mentioned in the film, and knew, and especially the conclusion of the Reconstruction period, that their life was not going to improve much while they were down south. And they had heard about the opportunity in the North, although a majority of them, many of them came using the railroad, like Dr. Kenny did. Many of them fit as many people in a car to make the arduous trip north to take their place in what was known as the Promised Land. Next slide, please. Jim Crow was horrifying. I'm not going to go into it in too much detail. You do know about it. And the Jim Crow is a whole talk into itself. But the number of lynchings that occurred in the South were actually more in number at the conclusion of the Civil War and at the conclusion of the Reconstruction period than they were doing all those hundreds of years of surgery beforehand. And the thought brutality was the only thing that was going to keep people in their place. And you see that lynching through this photo was not limited to men. Women were lynched as well. And who wants to stay and be in fear for this happening to you every day that you lived? And that's not an exaggeration. Next slide, please. It could be any infraction. Public leaders like W.E.B. Du Bois and Mary McLeod Bethune were who received education. Du Bois was the first one to receive a doctorate from Harvard, first Black man to receive a doctorate from Harvard. And they did not believe in being docile. Like Dr. Kinney, they believed in movement and in getting ahead without bowing and scraping and deference to people who were white. So they strongly urged people to move to the part of the country where your chances for improvement are better. Next slide, please. And I'm going through these quickly, I know, because my time is going. This is a Newark train station. We mentioned that many of them came on the train, and I think the next slide is a picture of people at the train station, if you can go to the next one. Most women, as they came, were domestics in the very beginning. A few of them were fortunate enough to, during World War I and during World War II, especially, to get jobs in factories. But no matter what their economic station in life, they were able to dress better. They had more freedom of travel. They had freedom to worship as they pleased as well. And this is a group of women who were church women. They formed clubs and auxiliaries in their churches that allowed them to help other members of their congregation. There was a strong network of migrants that began to form during the turn of the century, probably reached its height during the 1950s and the early 1960s, where there were self-help organizations such as the NAACP and the Urban League. We will hear about that in our next session on this on the 23rd of April. So I'm not going to say too much more about it. But in our cities of Newark in particular, the Urban League was a very strong organization that helped countless people. And we'll find out just how they did that next time around. Next slide. This is the corner of Broad Market where I mentioned the Ku Klux Klan headquarters was. This picture was taken in 1922, and you can't really see the picture of the Klan headquarters too well here, but this is where it took place, right in the heart of the city. Next slide. Okay, there's the Klan. This is at a New Jersey rally, and I believe in the Englishtown area. In 1917, I believe it was, they converted 1,200 people at one Klan rally to join the Klan. That's how widespread it was, over fear of these migrants coming from the South and settling in not just northern cities, but northern suburban and agricultural areas as well, taking jobs which they thought should rightfully belong to white men and women. What they didn't realize that with World War I and the cessation of some of the immigration activity that had gone on before that, there was a need for workers, and Black Southerners provided that need. But even though there were many immigrant groups who weren't accepted, Black people were accepted even less. Next slide. Okay. This is an example of Bethany Baptist Church. And I put this in here because my greater work on all this focused on an oral history project that included many of the people that are in this photo. That is Marian Anderson, who is standing in the middle with the pastor of that church, Reverend Hayes. I know that there are some Bethany people on the with us this afternoon on the Zoom, so I'm pointing that out in particular. She was a more than a one-time visitor to Bethany Baptist Church. And our Black churches provided a total life experience for its congregants, just as many churches did. You were there every Sunday. You were there for holidays. You were there after school. Many of them had after school programs. You were doing good work that was related to the church, perhaps on your days off on Saturdays. Your whole social network was connected to the church, usually one within walking distance of where you were. This is true for every denomination during that time period. We've sort of grown away from that these days. But during the migration period, the Black church was especially critically intervened in the lives of not only the Black migrants, but those who had been here for several years. Next slide, please. And I know that I'm moving swiftly. Let's keep going. Okay. This is the seated Lincoln statue that is in Newark, right outside of the county offices on West Market Street. I put this in here because I once did some oral histories with people, and I've been seeing the Lincoln statue all of my life. I never realized what significance it had in the lives of many people who lived here. One of the things that you would do when you arrived and had a moderate degree of success, meaning you found some place decent to live, or even not so decent, but you had a job and you were able to send a few pennies home to help others make the trip up here. But to prove that you had indeed arrived, this was true for migrants, but it was also true for immigrants from other countries. And I have been told by students that I've had that this is still true. You go to where the seated Lincoln is, you get all dressed up in your best, and you have your photo taken with the seated Lincoln to prove that you had indeed arrived in the promised land. As we saw from Ridgeley's film, it may not have remained the promised land for many, but you came and you put your best look forward, seated next to Lincoln, announcing your arrival in your what you thought was going to be your utopia. And I understand that, especially for immigrants that come from South America, this is still a tradition. I didn't halfway believe it until I saw a big family group taking photos on the seat at Lincoln about a month ago, one of those first nice days that we had. Next photo. Okay, this is just a photo of people, how they would load their cars and come up here. You can go to the next photo. And I'm completely off script now because I see my time going. Next photo. Okay. We saw examples of homes in Ridgeley's film, so I'm not going to go here. But this is some of the housing in the Central Ward of Newark back in the 1920s. I'm sorry to say that some of that housing still exists, but keep moving. Next photo. Okay, this gives you an example of how the population increased and changed through the years. In 1900, the total population was 246,070 people. It was an increase over the previous decade of 64,000 and a 35.3% change, and so on and so forth. Much of this, especially when we get to 1910 and 1920, has to do with the rise of the African-American population coming to the city. Next slide, please. And you can see it's a significant increase over a short period of time in how cities, this is just a smaller thing, a more detailed of it. And you can see that in 1870, the total percentage of the population of Black people was 1.7. By 1940, it had grown to 10.7, which again is a significant increase from 105,000 total to 130,000 total within a short period of time. Next slide. And this even includes white flight. Keep going. We're back to Mrs. Rose Parrish, which is the story that I wanted to tell. Mrs. Parrish married and married someone that she did not know very well, if I'm correct about that, Phil. But they decided that their life needed to be in the North. And so I don't know how they came up, but they came up to Newark, New Jersey, and found employment and did indeed find a better quality of life. Mrs. Parrish became a domestic and was really, and this is the one thing without a doubt you can believe is true that I'm saying, became an expert cook, an expert chef. And how do I know that? Because I've tasted some of her food And I've tasted her daughters and her granddaughters and her grandson, whom she trained. And it was in demand as a domestic because of her very pleasant manner and because of her expertise in the domestic arts. It was easy for her to find work, but just like we hear now, it was not quite so easy for her husband to do the same. He had difficulties finding jobs that would hire Black men. He didn't have a particular skill, if I remember correctly, but he found other ways to make a living. He was very creative about that, and they managed to do very well, raising their one daughter, their one child. Next slide. Okay, this is Kenny Hospital. That was on West Kenny Street in Newark, New Jersey, and they just tore it down a couple of months ago. It really saddened me when I rode by there and I saw the empty property. This is where he started, but next to it there was a larger building that is now a church, which became the hospital as his practice grew. Next slide. Okay. And the next one, these are church women again and men. This is Mrs. Parrish again. They attended Clinton Memorial Church, which is the oldest Black church in the city of Newark. She was a very faithful congregant. Here she is with two of her friends from the church. And they had the women's organizations, like I mentioned earlier before, and they would invite people to their homes for meetings where they could show off the new Northern culinary skills that they were learning in the homes that they worked in. And you can see how sharply they are dressed. Very different from what they would have looked like in the South. Actually, they probably could not have dressed this way for fear of retribution. So my point is the quality of their life with the types of jobs and the types of pay that they were supposed to get greatly increased. Mrs. Parrish was able to, and her husband were actually there. Her sister-in-law is Philip Wrights. I did not know that. And as long as I've been looking at that picture, I've never known that, but they were his sister-in-laws. Next slide. Here's Mrs. Parrish with the family car with her baby daughter in the end. A baby daughter that she was very proud of, who was able to graduate high school, was very adept with her secretarial skills, and was able to work in wonderful office jobs and provide very well for her family. Both of her two children are college graduates, some advanced education also involved in there. She was also very proud of the grandchildren and she was able to see all of them, I think, except for one, for Matthew. I think I'm right about that. But her life was just so completely different. Now, I will say her distrust of the medical system when she found that came close to her delivery with her child, she went back home. Her grandmother had been a midwife, and that's who she trusted to bring her new baby into the world. I've heard that story over and over again, even from women whose mothers were not midwives, that they felt that they could not trust Black doctors. Keep going. I am actually going to, I think, stop with the slideshow because somehow this is Clinton Memorial Church that she attended and is still standing. We'll stop there. I want to give you the opportunity to ask questions should you have any about anything that I've said or anything that you saw in the film.
Linda, Ridgeley is on now if you wanted him to say a word or two about his inspiration for these films.
Please do, Ridgeley. We missed you. I tried to pinch hit, but I'm not you. Go ahead.
I'm beside myself. I'm so regretful that I had 3:30 down for the meeting. And when you told me to come 10 minutes early, I thought this was 10 minutes early. And then I get here and I find this has never happened to me before. I'm so embarrassed. So I apologize to everyone for.
Well, I tried to do your film justice. I'm not sure if I did.
Yeah,
so
sure
I think there was a question about what inspired you to make the film. And I had Beverly talk about your meeting, but you may want to explain yourself.
So you're the perfect person to bring that up because actually you were the one that inspired me to make the film. When we completed parts 1 and 2, those of you who are familiar with it know that we spoke about slavery, and then we used personal stories to illustrate that. And Bev and Elaine's book was what inspired those stories. But as we were researching and as we were going through the film, we realized that we couldn't tell the story without really going into the current disparities and the impact that slavery had on the Black community up until today. So Linda mentioned to me when we were, when everything was completed after the films had premiered, she said, Ridgeley, you've told the story of slavery, you talked about the disparities that still exist today, but there's a gap in your storyline, and that is the Great Migration. And it would be great if we could tell the story of the Great Migration that actually led up to the disparities that exist today. So that was what inspired me, and it was a really wonderful way to make a documentary about this, the African American diaspora, because the Great Migration was a period that we were working with that gave us so many different elements that we could use. Not only the storyline of the Dr. Kenny story and the Jim Crow South, but there are also so many images that we were unable to use during the other two films because that period there were no images. So you really had to rely on the storyline and metaphors and artwork. So this was really sort of a treat to be able to gather all of these terribly wonderful images to tell the story, to illustrate what went on.
Thank you. So are there any questions from the audience for Ridgeley now that he's here? Thankfully. Thankfully.
Once again, my apologies to everyone. I've been planning this for a week. I could have sworn it said 3:30 on the invitation that I got in the beginning. Now I just looked at it and said, oh my God.
It's okay. As I said, I tried to pinch hit. Hopefully I didn't do too badly.
You covered for me. Thanks, Linda.
Okay. If not, then I am going to, Ridgeley, if you have no other words, I'm going to close this out and talk about what's to come. Okay. So as I mentioned in the opening for today, that this is the first of a 3-part series on the Great Migration. The second virtual program will be on April 23rd. If I'm wrong, Sam, please correct me. But I think it's April 23rd at the same time from 2 to 3:30. Yes. We have Nzinga, who will be there, who's an artist who asked one of our questions today. And we have several other people that you'll find very interesting. One of them is Dr. Gretchen Soren, who was with us once before, who wrote the definitive book of the Green Book. And she's at State University of New York. We have someone come from the Urban League. If you remember, I mentioned the Urban League in my remarks and what a pivotal role they played for migrants especially during the 1920s, 30s, 40s, and right up to the Civil Rights period. And it's still providing a very needed service these days. Those are among the two people who will be with us. So please make sure, put it on your calendars. Join us on the 23rd of April for episode number 2 of the Great Migration in New Jersey. We will be in person in October at Grounds for Sculpture. Once again, we don't have the exact date, but we usually tend to do a Thursday or a Friday. So X all of those out so you can join us at Grounds for Sculpture in October for the last program about the Great Migration. And then we will spin into civil rights. We have a whole series of events that we're expecting to do during the semi-quincentennial, which is the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. I don't know whether it should be a celebration or not, especially considering what is going on today and how far we have veered from that document that says all men were created equal. So we have some heavy discussions to do, and as we head into 2026 and 2027, and hopefully you will remain part of our fan base and be with us. But until then, I'm going to say goodbye. You're of course free to through the Sankofa Weekly newsletter, write us with any ideas or any questions that you might have, and we'll do our best to respond and to take most of your ideas into consideration when we're selecting our articles and we are doing our programming. Okay.
Linda.
Yes.
Joan, you mentioned a live.
Oh, yes, thank you. I didn't. Okay, thank you. For those of you who don't know, the Newark History Society, along with the Daughters of the American Revolution and the New Jersey Historical Society and my company, 1804 Consultants, are doing 8 straight days of programming honoring Cujo Benquante. Cujo Benquante was enslaved by the Benjamin Coe family on their plantation right here in Newark. He fought during the Revolutionary War in place of his master. He was in Washington's regiment, and he was with Washington for every major battle of the war. At the age of 70, he was discharged from the army. He was given an acre of land by his master. He had 7 children. By the time he died, he grew that 1 acre into 11. He was able to give each one of his children a plot of land and a home on it. He lived, I remember, started this business at the age of 70, did it for 30 years. He died at the age of either 104 and 105. We are excited about him for a number of reasons. Number one, he's the first known person of African descent to actually appear on the tax rolls as a businessman. Number two, for the past 20 years, people have been, 2 in particular, have been researching him. We have located his descendants who are now in Ohio, I believe Texas and Tennessee. They had no idea, had never heard of this man, but we have proved through DNA and everything else that they are descended from him. And we have also located the tribe that he was captured from in Ghana. He's from the Chem tribe there. Every year, that tribe, since the early 1700s, has been holding a ceremony for people, the royals who have gone missing and they did not know what happened to them. Cujo's name has been read every year for these past 250 some odd years.
Wow.
They will not read his name next year because they now know what happened to him. And some of those ancestral descendants are expected to come to Newark for the festivities. So the grand opening is on the 27th at the Newark Museum, where if you look on the Newark History website, and look on the top and on the bottom of the image, and you'll see the name Cujo Benquante. Click on that, and it will take you to 1, the history of Cujo, and 2, a listing of the 20 some odd events that we are having commemorating him. The New Jersey Performing Arts Center is placing a marker on May 3rd at 11 a.m. because he is buried along with his family members underneath that ground that NJPAC sits on.
Wow.
So we will have a memorial service for him that day.
Wow.
Okay. So please join us if you can. All events except for one are free and open to the public. I will tell you that there are 2 that require registration. One is the event at the Newark Museum. The other are Black History bus tours of Newark. There are 3 of them, 2 on Friday and 1 on Saturday. One of them on Friday is about 40% full. So if you would like to do one of those bus tours, please sign up through Eventbrite soon to make sure that you have a space there. All the other events are free and open. You'll see they're very diverse. There are genealogical courses at the Newark Public Library. The Greater Newark Conservancy is planting a garden with the plants that Cujo would have had in his horticultural business and curating an exhibit around that. Rutgers, there will be a 2-day symposium on African American life in New Jersey called From Revolution to Reparations. It's free. We feed you breakfast and lunch and a snack in the afternoon, and it will be at Rutgers University, Newark campus. Again, we'd like you to register for that, although it's not required, but we'd like to know how many people to prepare for. Day 1 will be in Express Newark, that's in the former Haynes building. Day 2 will be at the Paul Robeson Center. So please join us if you can. We've got scholars from all over coming to talk about this issue, including some from Rutgers, some from Princeton. They're coming from all over. So please join us if you can.
Wow. That's
okay. Or contact me if you need more information.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. Give us feedback. We always like to know what you're thinking about what it is that we do. So please give us feedback if you can. And pray for some warm weather. Okay. Take care, everyone.